Bleach Bypass, famously used on Saving Private Ryan, 1984, and a bunch of other films. What is it? If we want to emulate it well, we need to know what we're trying to reproduce. We're gonna start with an understanding of the film development process, but if you wanna jump right to the look, check the chapters in the description. Let's talk about how film is normally used and processed. Film captures images due to light-sensitive silver halide crystals. And in color film stock, like Kodak's famous Vision 3, there's 3 layers dedicated to each color. Blue's on top, green in the middle, and red at the bottom. Now these layers aren't tinted, they're just sensitive to that spectrum of color. So the blue layer's silver halide crystals will respond to blue light. When the silver crystals get exposed to light, they experience a change and a latent image is created in the crystals. Now, it's called a latent image because if you were to look at the film at this point, you wouldn't see any change. This is a chemical change invisible to the eye right now. The trick is, how do we take a latent image and convert it to a permanent visual image? Enter the development process. In a completely dark room, you bathe the exposed film in a bath of chemicals called developer. This chemical reaction turns the exposed silver halide into actual silver metal. Isn't that awesome? If you zoom in closely on black and white film, you can actually see the individual specks of silver metal creating the image. Now on color film, the developer chemicals not only create silver metal, but it also activates the dye couplers, which gives each layer the appropriate dye color. So now we have silver metal, colored dye, and then the unexposed silver halide that's left over. Now for color film, all we want is the colored dye to remain because the silver metal is just acting like a black and white image on top of our already colored dye. The way we remove silver is through 2 steps called bleach and fix. The bleach bath converts all the silver metal back into silver halide. And then the fix bath removes all the silver halide, leaving only the dyes. So the term bleach bypass, or silver retention as it's sometimes called, is when we bypass or modify that bleach and fix steps to leave a portion of the silver in the film. So what does this do visually? This adds density to the image, and we experience an increase of contrast as well as a loss of saturation and a bit of additional perceived grain. Let's translate this into the digital world using those building blocks. So here we have some sample Blackmagic raw footage that's gonna be our demo for this bleach bypass process. The first thing we're gonna do is just go into a Rec. 709 gamma and color space. The project was filmed so dark that it doesn't do a whole lot to the image. So what I'm gonna do is pop the highlights up a little bit more and get us to a more balanced starting place for this. So bringing the highlights up and the shadows a little bit lower. So let's start by adding that S-curve contrast, right? If we were to have 2 images on top of each other, we would expect definitely some denser shadows and maybe a little boost to the highlights, but overall, we are shooting for contrast. Now, I like where this is sitting right now, but aesthetically, I'm not really liking how the highlights are being handled. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a highlight roll off to those right here. This is an aesthetic preference for me right now. It's not a right or wrong choice. From there, let's start thinking about desaturation. Now, we could just, dial back the saturation and hey, call it a day, but let's try something a little more nuanced. So instead of taking saturation out of the whole image, let's first try just pulling saturation out of the highs and the lows. So I'm gonna back some of that off right about here. And what we'll notice is we're starting to get some of those nice silvery tones in the highlights, and the shadows are starting to go a bit more neutral. You can see it kind of in the highlights back here, and I'm liking where that's going. Now at this point, one of the things I'm not liking about the image is that it's leaning too kind of warm and green. So I'm gonna actually pop over and pull out a punch of green from it, and I'm gonna pull out a punch of red as well, and maybe a little more of the green. Now, if I was adding some final finesse, I'd probably look at throwing in a nice light bit of a vignette, taking down the sides there just a little bit, you'll see that, as well as isolating her face there and just adding a little bit to the highlights and a little bit to the midtones, just a little bit of a pop there. And so for comparison, we have our Rec. 709 with just a little added highlights, and then our Bleach Bypass edition. Oh, isn't that great? Don't you love how, I love how the shadows kind of play on this left side of her face. I love how that we get this silvery highlight look and the nice neutral shadows. It's a beautiful look. For future study, I've included a number of links about how film processing works, as well as deeper dives into the Bleach Bypass process. Find those in the resource link in the description. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this bleach bypass process. Is this something you want to be incorporating into your films? Is it something that you like the look of? Let me know down in the comments.